Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to be checking out this upcoming game called Scavengers. This is a free-to-play strategic shooter where players form squads of 3 and fight for survival in a hybrid of sandbox-style PvE and class-based PvP, all set in an unforgiven frozen wasteland. This video is being sponsored by Midwinter. They're a Seattle-based development studio established by veterans of the Halo, Battlefield, and Gears of War franchises, among others. Now, Scavengers was actually first announced back in 2019, but since that announcement, they've kept fairly quiet. They're looking to reintroduce people to the game as they've got an upcoming PC playtest and closed beta later this year. As always with the sponsored stuff, if you like what you see, there is a link below. Go ahead and check that out. So for you, this video will be me utilizing my strength of reading off basic information about video games. Although all I can actually show you in this video is some of the B-roll footage they gave me, I was able to go like fairly in depth about some of the various features and mechanics about Scavengers, so I'll be sharing those and all of that information with you here today. And let's just start off with, again, the basics of what is Scavengers. So they're calling this a strategic survival battleground. It's an action shooter that combines elements of the survival, sandbox PvE, and competitive PvP genres. Players will be teaming up in what is currently squads of 3, although they're open to more different team types in the future. Each player will get to choose from an array of different explorers that have their own unique abilities and weapons, and then you have to work together as a team, scavenging, gathering resources, fighting off enemy AI and players, all while trying to complete objectives and gather the most data before the match ends. Now, the basic background story of this game, if anyone cares about story in multiplayer games, is that an asteroid strike shattered the moon and plunged Earth into a second ice age. This also released this alien virus that corrupted life on the planet, and there's this advanced AI known as Mother who sends out the teams of her children to the planet's surface to try to gather resources in pursuit of a cure for the virus. It's a multiplayer game, so let's talk about the game. The main primary mode in Scavengers is this thing called Expedition, and this is where the teams of players are scouring this frozen wasteland, competing to bring back that data. So the matches can basically be broken up into 3 different phases. First, there's the explore phase. Matches will consist of 60 players in those teams of 3. They drop to the surface empty-handed and must find resources, weapons to fight with, and scrap that can be used to craft items. And the second phase is the hunting phase. Once you've started to get some resources and items and everything, you start to collect the data points, and you'll also be competing with rival teams and enemy AI forces, as well as trying to survive deadly elements. And then finally, there's the extract phase, this evacuation sequence where the teams converge into this massive dropship, and this is your final opportunity to take down enemy players and be the one to escape with the most data. Now, as I mentioned, they're focusing on squads of 3 to start, although in talking with them, evidently they're open to and considering doing duos and solos in the future. They said that the main reason they're starting with just the squads of 3 is to put everyone into one hopper in these early testing phases of the game. So you go out there, you collect resources, you get items and weapons, you level up, you fight other players while trying to get this data, and then you try to escape with the most data. But let's go into a few more specifics. Let's start off with talking about the type of conflict you're going to have, the type of enemies you'll be fighting. So obviously there's the rival teams, and they're always going to be prepared to fight you. One of the main factors actually pushing player engagement is the fact that you can take data away from other players that you kill. Now, in the first portion of each match, players will be dropping a percentage of the data they carry. I think they told me it was something like 30%. But at the very end phase, when the dropship comes, players will drop all of the points they're carrying when they die. Although it's worth noting that there will be locations throughout the match where players can go to bank their data points. So that's a good way to save some data points if you don't want to be running the risk of dropping them. But because that's a valuable thing to get to bank your data points, these are likely going to be very contested areas. So in the process of trying to bank them, you might end up just getting yourself killed. Besides the players though, enemy AI is a big part of this. This is really a PvEVP game, player versus environment versus player. So there's 3 factions in the game of enemy types. There are these Outlanders, which are these bands of marauders that will be primarily living at encampments scattered around the map. And then there's also the Scourge, these mutated humans who live beneath the surface, and you'll often find these around craters where data points can be found, and they possess a variety of deadly powers that you're going to have to contend with. And then finally, there is just the innate wildlife like bears and wolves, and these will be fairly aggressive and will attack your team as you move around the environment. So you're fighting players, enemy AI, and all of this is happening around those objectives. Beyond fighting other players, objectives are your primary source of data points. Now, these will be dynamically updated from match to match. So say in one game, you find this location that's guarded by some Outlanders, but in the next match, it might be filled with Scourge. And depending on the types of enemies that are there, this is going to change how you have to take on the objective, like the actual tactics that you put into play. Now, the physical location of those points will also be varying from match to match. It won't always be that objectives are at the same locations every single time. And there's also going to be these mini objectives that spawn during the second half of the match. They're like these little growths of space debris, and they provide smaller point rewards, but can be a good extra source of data as you're moving between major point objectives. And then once an objective has been completed, that location is actually closed out for the remainder of the match. So kind of like the data point banking areas, objectives will be pretty highly contested, because once an objective is done, that is it for the match. You can't, no other team can go and do that objective and collect those points. Survival systems are going to play a big role here, and there's really 2 major factors in this, the weather and then the food system. So for weather, there are these roaming pockets of storms that move around the map, and these will impact the player's temperature meter. Temperatures are going to be lower at nighttime in general, but also within storms. And then there are different categories of storm. The higher the category, the faster your temperature drops. If your meter drops into the danger zone, your health meter actually starts to freeze over and will continue to freeze, dropping your health until you raise your temperature. And if you don't ever get back into warmth, you can eventually freeze to death. They also said that during the end of the session, roughly the last 8 minutes or so, the outer storm walls will collapse inward, shrinking the play space. Now, this isn't going to work like a traditional battle royale circle where it goes down to like the super tiny, like postage stamp size, but it's going to be a small enough of a area to really increase player conflict before that dropship comes in. And then there's the food that I mentioned. Food will be scattered around the map. You can hunt wildlife to get meat that can be cooked at fires. There's also going to be like wild berries that will be growing across the environment, and you can find things like canned food while scavenging. Eating food is going to replenish your stamina meter, and you can kind of think of this as like your energy reserve. Stamina applies to things like heavy attacks with melee weapons, sprinting, jumping, and dodging. As you spend your energy, it's going to decrease your maximum energy pool. You're going to need to eat food to replenish it to expand your stamina pool. So it feels like stamina management is going to be a really important aspect to this game. Now let's talk about the end game and the dropship. As I mentioned, at the end of the match, the play space shrinks, and then eventually the dropship comes in, and that is when players are going to be focused on boarding the dropship, because that is how you get to secure your data that you've collected and have a chance at winning the match, which is going to give you like more end of match rewards. So the dropship, when it comes down, they said it's going to kind of act like this mini arena. Players will be fighting each other on the dropship, but it's not something that they said like one team of 3 isn't going to be able to lock the whole thing down. The dropship is apparently large enough and porous enough with like multiple levels and everything that there will be room for people to try to sneak in and whatever. It just won't be a single team of 3 dominating everybody. They talked a bit to me about environmental traversal. There's a few different things to do here. First of all, there will be a mantling system, so you can pull yourself up onto things like ledges, walls, and buildings. There's also a sliding system that's going to let you accelerate down slopes if you're trying to escape trouble or get a jump on enemies. And finally, there's also going to be vehicles in the game. These will be marked on the map, but will require a large amount of scrap to get them repaired and started. So it's going to give you a speed boost, obviously, getting in a vehicle, but this is also going to really be a huge flag for enemy players and telling them your location. As I mentioned, there are characters in this game. There's going to be a roster of 8 characters to choose from when this game launches. Each of them will have a unique ability as well as a unique weapon that they can craft. There are also talent trees that you can pick from, and then there's the loadout system that comes into play with this, where you can basically basically choose recipes for crafting specific weapons. That's also how you're going to get the chance to make your class weapon. So speaking of crafting works through this thing called the Keeper. The Keeper is this little robot that floats around and follows you throughout the match. Now, as you collect scrap, that will be the resource you use for crafting weapons, items, and things like shield upgrades. And besides crafting, the Keeper does a couple of other things. It also acts as a detection device, which it'll periodically ping for nearby players, and it is your respawn beacon, bringing you back to life after a period of time. They also talked about how there will be some sort of out-of-match progression. There's nothing in the game at the moment, but they're talking about things like this account-wide progression for things like unlocking new characters, as well as cosmetics. I think that's to be expected, as this is a free-to-play game. So the game will be free-to-play, as mentioned, and is coming to the PC in 2021. Eventually, there will also be a console launch for PlayStation and Xbox consoles. But the whole reason they're doing this sponsored video and stuff is to let people know about their upcoming test. So there is a technical playtest weekend starting today, September 18th, and going till Sunday the 20th. I guess anyone who registers on their website is going to get a key to participate. I think it's important to keep in mind that this is a pre-alpha version of the game, so players should be expected to experience bugs and performance issues. Really, they're using these tests to optimize for the upcoming closed beta, and that's supposed to be happening sometimes towards the end of the year, later in 2020, and early access will eventually be coming in 2021. And that pretty much does it. That is everything that I learned about Scavengers. Happy to share some of this information with you guys. As always with this sponsored content, if you like what you saw or heard, there's a link in the description below. Check that out. Helps me, and you can learn some more about the game, or maybe even check it out at this upcoming test. But either way, thank you guys for watching. As always, I appreciate your support, and I'll see you guys next time, all right? Take it easy.